So what you're looking at here is the, what we're looking at there is the film taken more than 100 years ago today. It was actually taken 4 days before the San Francisco earthquake, which was our disaster, similar to East Japan earthquake. And it was actually discovered only recently. It was taken from a video camera mounted on a cable car that was traveling down Market Street. This is what the city looked like 4 days later, or actually 5 or 6 days later because of the fire. Most of the destruction that you see here is from the fire. So this was our magnitude 8 earthquake disaster. No tsunami, just a disaster. So what I would like to do today is to tell you about some work that we've been doing to make practical products that people can use for disasters. So the next talk just after mine will be by Eric, and we're both sort of interested in computational science aspects to disaster risk reduction and risk management. One of the things that we've done, I've done anyway, is with a group of other people, we actually have a little startup company that produces some of these programs and apps that are on the internet websites that you can use. And so these are free to use, and you can locate them on the web. I'll show you where they are, and you can use them. But what I want to do today is mainly talk about some of the aspects of these. So I want to talk mostly about forecasting. And one of the things we talk about is why should you forecast, and why should I not have a pointer? There must be a pointer. Here's a pointer. So why forecast? There are actually people in our community that say we shouldn't do this for various reasons. They say it isn't accurate enough, or we shouldn't put ourselves out there and so forth. But forecasts are needed for insurance rates, for safety purposes, and for building codes. And every country in the world has an earthquake forecast. It may be the statement that we don't have earthquakes in our country, but every country does have a forecast. Okay, so the premise, though, is that any forecast made by our scientific community is bound to be at least as good as, and probably better than, forecasts made by politicians, lawyers, and bureaucrats. So if we don't do the forecasting, they will. That's not a good idea. I'm going to make a distinction in my talk between prediction and forecasting. If you actually look in the dictionary, it says they're the same concept. But we use them now differently. A prediction is a statement that can be validated or falsified with a single observation. An example being, if I flip a coin, it's going to turn up heads on the next toss. That is a prediction which I can validate by one coin toss. A forecast is a statement for which multiple observations are required to determine some confidence level. So an example of that would be the chance of a fair coin turning up heads on the next toss is 50%. So in that case, I will need 50 or 100 coin tosses to validate that, verify that statement, and arrive at a confidence level. Well, what we like to do, we like to do things at scale on the web. And when you do that, when you do web-based forecasting, there's a variety of challenges that you have to deal with. One is acquiring and validating the data. The data has to be of a certain high quality, and we use the online catalogs from global catalogs from the USGS, basically, and some other real-time feeds. Models, we have to worry about how to build models. We have to worry about making the algorithms efficient. I mean, if you log on to a website and you have to wait 2 hours for an answer, you're not going to use that website. So the algorithms have to give you an answer literally within a few seconds. We want to validate and verify the models, and then we need to do error reporting and correction. As far as information delivery is concerned, we want to automate it so we can backtest the forecasts that we make. It has to work well on the web. It has to be a nice user interface. We want to provide useful tools so that people can actually get information or extract information from the website. And we actually also want to allow people to communicate with us and with each other. And then there's the whole issue of meaning. What do you mean by probability? Probability is a very slippery concept, and even many scientists make mistakes in interpreting probabilities. There have been a series of actually articles on the web just recently about how doctors in the most sophisticated situations misinterpret probabilities and statistical results of tests, such as you're tested for HIV or cancer or something like this, a lot of times, and you say there's a 95% probability of the accuracy of the test, what that means is 5% of the time your diagnosis is going to be wrong, and if your sample is 1,000 people, then that means 50 people are going to get the wrong diagnosis. Okay, so that sort of thing. And then visual presentation, you want something that's visually appealing and intuitive. Since we're doing forecasting, we need graphical user interfaces, we need graphic information systems. We want to think about correlations. Correlations don't imply causations, and we need some kind of expert guidance, which means blogs these days and things like this. So for those of you who don't know what an earthquake is, this is an example of the type of earthquake we have in California. It's not the kind you have here in Japan. In Japan, we have what are called thrust earthquakes, by and large, in the trench offshore. That's what the East Japan earthquake was. This is the kind of earthquake we had in 1906 in California. So we've got two tectonic plates, let's say the North American Pacific plate, and far away from this fault, which is the San Andreas Fault, the forces build up on the fault itself and deform the rocks, and then basically what happens is that there is a rupture, a fracture, and a jump of the tectonic plates to some new position, and then you start over again. Okay, so any forecast really has to reflect this kind of physical process. So the forecast that I will show you today is what is called, what we call the natural time Weibel forecast, and it's been published in being published in various places. It's a global forecast, and it's done in a self-consistent way over the entire Earth. Now, the way other folks do it is using a lot of geology and locating all the faults and the paleoseismic history and various things like that. But in order to do this in such a way that we can put it on the web and have some kind of meaningful results, we need to be able to have a simple method that can be updated in real time, because a forecast is not worth much if it takes you 5 years to produce, and the current California forecast that has been computed by the U.S. Geological Survey has taken them 5 years to produce a single 30-year forecast using a different method. So we wanted a method that was much more efficient and quick and that could be validated. The California forecast that the USGS produces cannot be validated at all because it uses what's called expert opinion. That is to say, people sitting in a room telling you what they think, and they can volve this in various ways. And so bottom line is you can't make a forecast using this method for 1995 and test it against what actually happened in 1996 because it's expert opinion, okay? Whereas if you have a fully automated forecast, you can actually go back and do such a thing. So you can back test it and validate it. This forecast is based on filling in what's called the Gutenberg-Richter magnitude frequency relation. This relation has been known since 1942. In Japan, it's been known since 1933. It was called the Ishimoto-Aida relation, Ishimoto-Aida relation in Japan. But Gutenberg and Richter popularized it in the US, and the name stuck. In any event, this relation says that for every roughly 1,000 magnitude 3 earthquakes, which are small, there's about 1 magnitude 6 earthquake. So what we do in this method is we start counting the small earthquakes once a big earthquake has occurred, and once we get to 1,000, then it's about time for another magnitude 6 earthquake. And we take that information and we transform it into a probability by using what is called a Weibel distribution, Weibel statistics. So this does display elastic rebound type of behavior because of this counting algorithm. There's a gradual increase in probability prior to the large earthquake and a sudden decrease just after. So we only need about a half dozen parameters for each site that we look at, and those values are determined from global data. We use the ANSS, as I said, the USGS Global Seismic Catalog. As you'll see, the probabilities are highly time dependent and they change rapidly, and the advantage is that we can verify these things by standard testing procedures that are used in the weather and climate community. So here's an example. There was an earthquake of magnitude 6.6 that happened on April 24th off Vancouver Island. And so just sort of randomly, I was preparing this paper for submission at that time, so we decided to use this earthquake. So there's a 200 kilometer circle that we drew around this earthquake, which is located right there. And then what we did was calculate the chance of the earthquake using this website. as a function of time. So the chance of the earthquake varies from about 20% during the next year for a magnitude 6 earthquake, starting in 2008, and then we see this time series, which means that the probability of this event went up, and then there was an earthquake, and it went down, and it went up again, and went down with an earthquake, it went up, it went down with these earthquakes, and so forth, and then it finally went down when this latest earthquake occurred. So this is the kind of behavior that I mean when I say elastic rebound. The probabilities go up and down as the forces on the fault go up and down. Now, surprisingly, most of the other forecasts that are done, in fact, all the other forecasts are done to my knowledge around the world, don't have this property. Basically, what happens is something else. They either stay fixed with time, or in fact, just after the earthquake, the probability goes up, which is very, very counterintuitive. So this is a website that you can access, anybody can access. It's called openhazards.com, and what I'm going to be doing is looking at these tools that are listed here, okay? And I probably, I'll show you a few slides and then we'll actually look at the website here. So here's Japan, Sendai, in fact, drew a 100-kilometer circle, radius circle around this thing, and I extracted this forecast in a way that I'll show you. This is the chance of a magnitude 7 earthquake as a function of time from 2008 up until the present, basically the present. I think this was accessed on June 25th. And so you can see the effect of the East Japan earthquake. The probability of having a magnitude 7 went up. And then as a result of this earthquake that happened on April, I think it was 24th, no, May 24th, 2013, in this area, it dropped these chances of an earthquake way down. So this is fairly typical of what we see with this type of forecast. This is for Tokyo, same type of behavior, and this is for a place in southern Japan called Miyazaki. Okay, so, and I'll show you how this works. So let's pull up this website, okay, and what I'll do is start off in sort of a neutral, with a neutral display here of this thing. It's actually rather easy to use. And let's make this so you can see it. So we'll go to this web app, so we renamed this thing. And we're on the hazard viewer right now, and that's what that is. So the first thing I'll do is, let's say I'll display a forecast. So I'll select the forecast and display a global forecast. Now this is updated nightly, and as I'll show you, it changes fairly rapidly. So this is the situation that we computed last night. Sendai is right here, and offshore here where the East Japan earthquake occurred. What you see here is the probability of a magnitude 6.5 earthquake in this region, and it's actually been increasing in the last few days, just after that earthquake we had last week. You can do a forecast by simply checking this selection circle thing here, and let's make a 50-kilometer circle, and put it right on Sendai, where we are today. I'll move the map down a little bit. We'll display a forecast again, just so we know what we're doing. I'll pull the map out a bit, okay? And then what we can do is click on this forecast time series button. Now this takes a few minutes to, might take a few minutes to come up because we're actually parsing a fair amount of data. But it's really that easy. So the numbers that you see corresponding to the forecast actually come out down here. And let me read those off to you because you can't really see it. Okay, so here's our forecast at function of time. So this is for a magnitude. This is the chance of a magnitude 6 earthquake occurring somewhere in this circle from over the time period from 2008 to today. And you can see that in 2011, it increased, started to increase fairly rapidly in here because of the East Japan earthquake. You can see a sort of more interesting earthquake cycle here. Again, this is the sudden increase there in 2011 was because of the East Japan earthquake, and it drops down. So within this circle, the chance of having a magnitude 7 earthquake is really quite low. Okay, so it's only a few percent. If I move this guy out, however, to the red area out here, and then hit this thing again, you'll see something quite different. It turns out, obviously, that the chance of having an earthquake out in this source, a major earthquake in this source region of the East Japan earthquake is much larger. Okay, And here is the thing, and it will come up here shortly. So that's pretty easy to use. So here is the chance of such a magnitude 6 or larger earthquake occurring within this circle. And you can see that it went up substantially on March 11th. It remains pretty high. It's up in the 60 to 80% range. That should not be unusual at all. If you think about it, that's where all the action is happening in this region. This is the chance of magnitude 7 earthquake. So again, it went up following March 11th. It has done some different things, and it's actually now begun to increase again fairly dramatically. So for those of you guys who live here, that's a warning, I guess you would say.
Quick question, please.
Yes?
What's on your vertical axis? You said.
Excuse me?
What's on your vertical axis?
There was the chance from 0% to 100% probability.
On any particular day? Or
during the next year,
during the next year, within
that circle. Yeah, for a magnitude, in that case, for a magnitude 6 earthquake. Yeah, sorry, I should have explained that. So another thing that if you don't want to be that complicated, we can use something like this personal earthquake forecast app. So here we are in Sendai. It does a geolocate. You can actually enter coordinates up there or locations or what have you, and the numbers come out here for 1 month, 1 year, 3 years for magnitude bigger than 5, 6, and 7. In fact, let me see if I can make that bigger so you can see it. Maybe that's a little bit better. Maybe that works a little bit better. So here it says that in agreement with what I put up previously, within 1 year for a magnitude 7 earthquake within a 50-mile radius, I think it is 50 miles, we think in terms of miles in the U.S. for some silly reason. It's an 8%, 7.5% probability that we compute for the next year. Okay, so that's fairly easy. You can enter anything like Los Angeles, California here, and you get something appropriate to that. It took about 3 years to develop this algorithm, by the way. So here's Los Angeles, and our numbers are actually quite a bit lower, which is what we would expect at the moment. We're not expecting magnitude 7 earthquake at all. It's 7.7% there. So that's another thing. Now, planning purposes, we also have on this site a home damage estimator. So, for example, I can take a home, either enter an address down here, or I can just move this house over to some location like San Francisco. So let's go look at somebody's house here. So what we've done here is to take the forecast and we'll actually show it, it'll show up here, but we can locate some house. This particular one is at 446 Urbano Drive in San Francisco. And I can actually search for my own house. It has, we took this data comes from Zillow. So this was built in 1928, has 1 floor, apparently 2,650 square feet, and it's worth $700,000, more or less. It's probably on soft ground because it's San Francisco. I can take an earthquake, for example, and put it on the Hayward Fault, which we're all expecting an earthquake on, not in the not distant future, because we're basically at the recurrence interval time. Assign it to a magnitude 7 earthquake, and then create a report. So what we've done now, that's $190,000 of damage is what we forecast to this house, mainly because it was built in 1928, and if it has not been scientifically retrofitted, then it's at significant risk. So this type of technology can be done today. What we've done is to take a forecast and we've convolved it with a propagation code, or what's called a GIMPI, a ground motion propagation equation, to propagate the potential ground motion acceleration to a site. And we've combined that with a damage model from Graf and Lee, which was published in Earthquake Spectra, with our earthquake engineers have modified. So this code actually works with any structure that conforms to the International Building Code. Okay, so the building code has been improved over time, so we assume that structures built in 1928 basically were unreinforced masonry or something like that. Okay, and they've gotten better through time, and the building code reflects that. So if you want to use these, but you don't happen to be in a place where you can use your computer, you can always download our mobile app that just got written for iOS. I would like to be able to demo this on the screen, but I can't do that because of the Wi-Fi system here. But here is the app. You can download it from the App Store. It's called QuakeWorks, okay, all one word. Or you can Google on open hazards or search on open hazards. It has the same functionality of what I just showed you there. So let me go back and show you a couple of other results. This is, and one more demo soon. This was the Nami, Japan earthquake that just happened last Saturday. I went down to the bar, photographed the rising sun in the land of the rising sun. And I was sitting there at 4 a.m. and the hotel began to shake. I was on the 26th floor. And then the elevator shut down and I was stuck in the bar for an hour. Now, unfortunately, the bar was closed, so I didn't get the benefit of that. But these, okay, so this is the circle. It's 100 miles radius. And this is pre-earthquake, just pre-earthquake. Since we update every night at midnight, I went back and downloaded the forecast as soon as the earthquake occurred, which was the forecast for the day before. And then the next day I downloaded it again and looked at it, took a screenshot, looked at it. And you can actually see that the color contours have become much less intense. The probability has gone down. Okay, now following a few days later, this is what it was like. So on the 12th, it looked like this, and today it's begun to intensify and color again and build up as time has gone on, and earthquakes, small earthquakes have occurred. So there's a comparison. We could do the personal earthquake forecast, which I've showed you, the home damage estimator, which I've shown you, and the QuakeWorks app, which I've shown you. Now, one of the things that I want to show you is this thing here. I see one of our colleagues from the Philippines over here. This is an app that is in development, and it can be used for planning purposes. So suppose you want to know which of your structures might be most vulnerable from a major earthquake that might happen in some area. So you can go to a site like this, and this will become a mobile app at some point, and you can do the following. So what we've done is to preload this app with some structures from a couple of different countries and some hospitals in the Philippines, for example. So here's the Philippines. And let me display this map in that format and put up the forecast on top of it. And so what we see here is a map of the Philippines, our little earthquake icon here, and these four hospitals, which are the Alabat Island District Hospital, the Hospital de Soledad, the Lucena United Doctors Hospital, the San Polac Medicare Community Hospital, and the Tayabas Community Hospital. Okay, so suppose I now say, okay, let's take this earthquake and we'll assume that it's not magnitude 3, but it's magnitude, let's say, 6. Okay, and I can place it near one of these hospitals, and what I compute here are the peak ground accelerations show up in this column. So the Hospital de Soledad, which I assume is B here, I can expect probably roughly 12% peak ground acceleration. That's 12% of surface gravity. And a damage factor, that is to say a fraction of damage, so the reconstruction costs would be probably about 10% or 0.1. Okay, so I can change this, obviously, to larger magnitude sizes, and obviously the damage, indicated damage gets to be bigger. Obviously, if I keep moving this along, some of these things, now this is a bit surprising, the one that seemed to respond the most when I made this into a 7.9 earthquake was Hospital A, which is up here. The Alabat Island District Hospital, presumably because the construction there that we had put in, which by the way is not necessarily the correct construction or dates because we don't really know that. This would have to be put in by a user, a person who's familiar with the construction of the hospital itself. Yeah.
When you say the factor of value, which is 1.19,
yes.
What are the indicators we are using here to mention that factor? Is this the beginning video?
It goes, okay, so what we have here is a number of stories, the type of construction, which is masonry or a steel frame reinforced or perhaps wood, the type of ground it's sitting on, which might be soft or hard, the year of construction, which keys into the building code and whether it was built to standards and these kinds of things. Okay, so there's about 6 or 8 parameters that characterize each of these structures. So this, by the way, would not substitute probably for a very detailed civil engineering review of this structure, you should do that, one should do that, but it would be an indication of where you might go to look.
I have done similar kind of work and with the National Economic Authority. So we have developed, based on the past old earthquakes, and then we develop a PG value by each zone. So we have seismic zones and then we have pulses.
Right.
And we have that whole data available. What if we put that data in your
So we can do that. The other thing that we can do, by the way, since we have a forecast that changes all, every day, we can compute where and the most likely earthquake is, how big it's likely to be. Right, and then use that to estimate the forecast the damage potential to this structure. Now, once the earthquake actually occurs, if one occurs, unfortunately, what you could then do is take the icon, place it where the earthquake occurred. You're sitting in the command headquarters, you place the earthquake where it occurred, you say, this hospital probably suffered the most damage. Let's go out and look there first. Okay, let's send our team of people out there first to look at that and report back to see if indeed it was damaged most. That type of planning, okay, is possible using this kind of app. And of course, we also have this one we did it for the Jakarta area as well. So this was with a bunch of the television towers and high rises and so forth. So that can be, one can play around with that as well, and I can show you where this is if you want to mess with this yourself. But as I say, this is actively under development and it'll turn into a mobile app at some point in the not too distant future. Okay, so the last thing on this list was social networking. I showed this last year. We have a social network that people can use if they want to, and that is helpful if you want to do some kind of communication and group planning. So that's available if people want to use that as well. That's mainly what I wanted to cover. I have about 10 minutes, but maybe what I'll do is if there's a quick question, any other quick questions? Yeah.
I wanted to get some idea of the parameter uncertainty in the model. So you said there's something like half a dozen per,
yes.
And that's spatially, so per spatial location.
Right.
And then for each spatial location, there would be a different set of algorithms. Do you have any idea of what the customary distributions on those?
Well, for example, one of the main things is the Gutenberg-Richter B value, which is the slope of the magnitude frequency relation. That typically varies by plus or minus 5%. So indeed, one would really want to propagate the error through these things, which you can do. We haven't really done it in detail, but and I should show you the validation curves too. But basically, the forecasts are better than a random forecast at about the 1.5 signal level, typically.
And when you're actually making your forecast, your probabilistic forecast, what is the, I guess, the bounds on your confidence for, say you're thinking 60%?
It's probably plus or minus 15–20%, let's say, for, if the computed probabilities were something like 20% for magnitude 7, the plus or minus 1 signal would probably be somewhere between 15 and 25%, I would guess. So by no means perfect, but at least you have some idea of what you're looking at. Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert, so I know, I do not have much knowledge in terms of earthquake prediction. And I was just wondering, probably that you could enlighten us a bit on how the model could capture the stress that has been released, and thereafter the stresses are being shifted upwards or downwards.
We don't actually measure stress. What we do is we count small earthquakes, and we use that as a proxy for stress. Okay, so once the big earthquake has occurred, the chance of the next earthquake decreases to a low rate, and then it starts to increase as you count, as small earthquakes begin to occur.
I see. So you're relying on the aftershock to actually do
Correct.
prediction.
Correct. Well, all earthquakes, not just aftershocks, including the background events as well. Yeah. So, any other questions while he's getting ready? Yeah.
Do you consider aftershock as a small earthquake, or
yes.
do you consider it separate?
No, earthquakes are earthquakes. We can't tell which ones are aftershocks and which ones are foreshocks and which ones are background.
I mean, once we define the aftershock, it can take a certain period of time before the earthquake and after.
No, we don't make that distinction. We just use all the earthquakes.
Earthquake and earthquake.
Because, you know, once you start trying to define these things, you start to inject your biases into the catalog. A lot of people like to decluster catalogs, for one thing, and we don't believe in doing that because, again, that's a very arbitrary thing. You know, what's an aftershock to one person may not be an aftershock to somebody else, depending on what their choice is. So we just use the catalog as it is. Yeah.
One more question. You said this was globally consistent, so could you also give conditional probabilities of earthquake?
Could we do it?
Conditional probabilities, chance of concurrent events, or?
Well, these really are conditional probabilities. Given that an earthquake happened last Saturday, what's the probability of an earthquake, a similar earthquake happening next week?
But you could get, for example, the probability of an earthquake in 2 places at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, basically, we're getting the probability within a circle, within a region. We're not saying it's on this fault or that fault.
Okay.
Last question.
Yeah.
How do you incorporate the return period of, because you are saying that the earthquake is considered earthquake.
Right.
So even the aftershock is an earthquake, then how the return period of an earthquake is different than the return period of the aftershock?
So because of the Gutenberg-Richter relation, the rate of occurrence of smaller earthquakes tells you something about the rate of occurrence of the bigger earthquakes because of this relationship of like 1,000 to 1 or whatever it happens to be, depending on the B value. So when you measure what we do is we measure the time average rate of the smaller earthquakes, and then we extrapolate that to the return period of the bigger earthquakes in that region. Now seismicity can go up and down, so you know that rate can change, but we use data back to 1980. Now, in the USGS forecast for California, they actually use geologic data that goes back like 1,000 years using paleoseismic data. The problem is that there are a lot of issues with paleoseismic data. Just because you see an offset on a trench doesn't necessarily mean that that offset was the same earthquake that you see somewhere else that was plus or minus 15 years different or some such thing. And what you're seeing at the surface may not reflect what's going on at depth anyway. An example of that is the Loma Prieta earthquake, which had no ground breakage. It was a magnitude 7 earthquake on the northern Santa Cruz Fault. There was no surface breakage from that earthquake. So from paleoseismology, we would never have known that earthquake existed.
But that can be toward the rock behind you. If the surface is hard, so it's medium or soft.
Right.
Because the G value changes.
Right. Right.
So maybe that is due to the surface lithology, which is basically affecting.
Right. But
Only the research period, but
right.
the ground.
But the point here is that paleoseismology has its problems too, and actually there's not that much of the data around anyway. In California, there's something like only a couple of hundred paleoseismic data, and you're trying to constrain tens of thousands of parameters with just a few data. So you're supposed to put that on. This person.
Okay, so I'm going to expound a little bit further on what John talked about and give kind of a more general overview of computational modeling for multi-hazards. My name is Eric Hine. I'm from the University of California at Davis, and I work with the computational infrastructure for geodynamics there. I'll explain a little more about that later. So basically, my goal with this talk is to just give you kind of an overview of what computational modeling is and why it's used and how it applies to multi-hazards. I'm going to try to not go into a huge amount of technical detail. I just want to give you an overview and help you understand a bit of how it might be useful. John already explained quite a bit about how it can be used for earthquake and seismology work. So I'll explain a little bit more. So basically, I want to just discuss what is computational modeling and why do we use it. Give you a few examples involving computational seismology, and then also describe a little bit about the virtual California earthquake simulator that I've written with John Rundle and a few other students at UC Davis, and then give you a little information about the organization I work at, because that might be able to provide some resources for your own work. Okay, so first of all, what is computational modeling? Basically, we use a computer to approximate the behavior of a system using well-defined rules. So we say something like, this is how the Earth behaves, and there's an earthquake, and then given the rules about how the Earth behaves, this is how the earthquake moves through the Earth. Or this is how water behaves, given that there's a tsunami right here, the water will propagate and hit the land at this speed and inundate up to this level and so on. And the rules are generally just well-known physical equations with things that involve gravity, temperature, stress, pressure, anything related to what you're modeling. And if you don't know the exact rules or you don't know the exact parameters, you don't know exactly what will happen when the water hits the land, then you can try a large range of parameters and see, okay, 80% of the time the water will get up this high, 20% of the time it'll get up even further. And so we should design such that we can assume for the worst case scenario where it'll get very far inland. And then also, because you're running this on a computer, it's very easy to try different rules, to try different parameters, to experiment with the system, and to just find out what might happen given these different possibilities. Okay, and there are many different types of simulations. I've listed just a few of them up here and given a few examples. So there's finite element, where you essentially, it's like Legos almost. You have your model and you break it up into little pieces, and each piece interacts with the pieces nearby. And this is commonly used in things like car engineering or building engineering, bridge engineering, civil engineering, or even seismology. So the little example I have there is you have a soda can or a cylinder, and it's crushed at a certain force level, and the elements start to bend and break. Another kind of simulation is n-body, where you essentially have a large number of bodies and they all interact with each other. And this is commonly used in things like molecular simulation, drug design, where you have all the molecules interacting with each other and interacting with the biological system. And it's also used in astrophysics, and it's actually also used a little bit in earthquake simulation. Another kind of simulation that actually is very relevant for hazard assessment is agent-based simulation. And this is where the individual components of your model they represent people, for example. And you assign them rules that say something like, when there's an emergency, run towards the nearest evacuation point. And then given how fast they can run and the paths that they take, and maybe they get confused and they take the wrong path, you can try to develop techniques for what is the best evacuation strategy, and you can try out different techniques quickly and try to develop rules to optimize your evacuation. And finally, the other one, the other kind of simulation is cellular automata, which is commonly used in chemical or biological simulations. It's not quite as applicable. Okay, so here's just a little example from some of my own work. This is a finite element simulation. I do a lot of work with deep earth study. And so this is material in the deep earth moving over millions or billions of years. And you can see, plumes of material from the mantle moving up and pieces moving down and so on. So that's just, a simple example of what these kind of simulations are like. Okay, so I've told you a little bit about computational modeling, but I haven't really said why do we even care? Why do we want to use it? One thing is that a lot of phenomenon occur on scales that are just, too big or too small, or too long. So like the Earth changes over millions or billions of years. We can't create another Earth to try things out with, so we have to model it on a computer. A big reason for doing simulations is that it can be too expensive or too dangerous to perform real experiments. There's a joke about, along a lot of bridges, you see like maximum weight 5 tons. How do they know that? Well, they just kept driving bigger and bigger trucks over it until it broke, and then they just built it again and said, okay, the limit's 5 tons. No, you run a simulation, you study what happens with the actual bridge. And then same in multi-hazards. You can't break a dam and see what happens in the city, when it floods. So instead you create a simulation, you model what the city is like, you model what the water flow is like through it, and then you determine what the effects are. And then finally, there can be too many parameters. There are too many unknowns. You don't know what will happen in the real world. And so simulations allow you to try a large number of possibilities. Okay, John covered a little bit of this in his own talk. So one thing that simulations are used for is, in regards to multi-hazards, for example, is determining what kind of a shaking do you expect from an earthquake. So they developed these building codes. Well, how do they decide what the building code should be like? You know, why not just make every building able to withstand a magnitude 10 earthquake? Because that would cost way too much. So what they do is they run simulations and they say, okay, given an earthquake somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean, how much shaking can we reasonably expect to occur in Sendai? And given how much shaking we can expect, what kind of building can we make to withstand that shaking? And then similarly, the insurance rates. You know, if you expect that you're going to have at most a magnitude 7, you're going to have very different building codes and insurance rates than if you expect at most a magnitude 9. And finally, you know, you can, given that you have, you know, let's say we expect a magnitude 9, what kind of damage can we expect in an area, and what can be the response mechanism? So again, John discussed this in his own presentation with the hazard maps. You know, I come from Davis, California, which is actually kind of on the upper right of the map there, and so I'm not that worried about a magnitude 7 earthquake. The biggest I've ever felt actually is like a magnitude 3. So, you know, it's a very different situation than somebody who lives in San Francisco. Okay, and here's another example of this. This is a view of the 1964 Alaska magnitude 9 earthquake, and you can see it just went off there, right below the A. The A is Anchorage, and so you can see the earthquake waves are propagating through, and it's not just a simple, you know, earthquake waves spread out. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of the waves refract, the waves interact with the ground material in different ways, and you're going to get concentration of the waves in some points. You're going to get damping of the waves in some points. And so this helps you understand, you know, given that maybe you live in Anchorage, what kind of shaking can you expect if this kind of earthquake were to occur again, given that what we know about the ground material and the surroundings. And so this code, this simulation here was actually run with a code called SpecFem3D, which we helped develop at the Computational Infrastructure for Geodynamics, and it's publicly available. So anybody who wants to use this code to study seismic wave propagation, seismic hazard in their own areas are certainly welcome to download it and try it and talk to me or other scientists if you have any problems with it. I'll go ahead and skip this because it goes on for a little while. If I can skip it. There we go. Okay, this is another example. This is the virtual California code, and it's an earthquake simulation code. And right here what we're seeing is visualization of INSAR fringes, essentially describing how much displacement, or roughly, you know, how strong an earthquake is, for various earthquakes in California faults. So you can see every time an earthquake occurs in the simulation, you can see the fault light up, and if it's an especially big earthquake, then you can see the rainbow fringes around it. And then the lower left, it's just barely visible, but that shows the magnitude frequency distribution that John was talking about. And so the idea with this is that you can run these simulations for long times, and you can look for patterns, and you can understand how the stress change from a given earthquake affects the probability of an earthquake occurring in another location. And I forget, I'm not sure if it happened already, but there should be a pretty large earthquake coming up in just a minute. Yep. Maybe that was it. All right. Okay, I'll just continue on. Okay, so a little bit more about Virtual California. This is an earthquake simulation program, like I just showed you. Developed by myself and Michael Sachs, and originally by John Rundle. It combines, like I mentioned before, there are different simulation types. It combines an n-body simulation and cellular automata style simulation. And basically, over very long time periods, the different earthquake faults interact with each other. Some, put stress on others, some take stress off of others. And then when an earthquake occurs, the earthquake fault ruptures, and the stress changes, and that changes the probability of earthquakes occurring in other areas. And the goal of this code is to help understand long-term earthquake statistics, cycle statistics, and behavior. And we just released this code about a week ago. It's available at the website listed down there. And there's also a manual with numerous examples there. So if you're interested in looking into this code to try and understand how earthquake cycles occur and what the statistics are, you're welcome to download it and use it. And feel free to ask me if you have any questions. All right. Yeah?
Quick question. Can
Yep.
you use this for other areas?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, it's deceptively named. It's called Virtual California, but you can use it in any model you want, any area. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's one thing we should do is change the name to Virtual Earthquake or something like that. Right. It's not just California. Okay. And finally, little plug for my own organization here. I work for the Computational Infrastructure for Geodynamics. We're based in Davis, and we're funded by the NSF. And basically, the goal of this is that we found in the past that many researchers write programs to study these different phenomena, study tsunamis, landslides, wildfires, earthquakes. And what happens is they'll write this program, and then they'll get a PhD from it, and then they'll throw it away, and then some other student at another university will write the exact same program, get a PhD from it, throw it away. And so many of these programs have probably been written 20 or 30 times already. And so rather than rewarding people for just doing the same thing over and over, we said, well, let's stop it reinventing the wheel, and let's encourage people to donate their programs and update them and support them, provide documentation, make it so other people, other scientists are able to use these and improve them to study further their own research areas. Okay, so I think I've got like 10 more minutes, so any questions? Yes?
Is NSF also funding the support and maintenance role that?
Oh, yeah. So there was CIG 1, that finished 2010. Now we're in CIG 2. There will most likely be CIG 3, which is another 5 years. Yeah, so it's 5-year steps, yeah. But the code will always be available, just, if anybody wants to use it. Yeah, it is a bit uncommon for NSF, because they tend to they want just papers, they want research. But, if people just keep doing the same thing over and over to get those papers, it's kind of wasting money, yeah. Yes?
Thank you. How do you validate the simulation, the accuracy of the simulation compared to the real disasters?
Sure. Yeah, well, okay, so for example, in the case of SpecFEM 3D, the seismic wave propagation simulation that you saw, let me back up to that slide, actually. Okay, here we go. So you can see all the green dots on here, and okay, there we go. So each one of those green dots is a seismometer, actual seismometer that was recording the earthquake at that time. And so what you do is you run the simulation forward, and you get a certain recording at each one of those seismometers in the simulation. You compare it with the real world seismometer data, and if you just assume that the Earth is completely homogeneous, then you're going to be wrong. And so what you do is you take what you recorded, and then you modify your model to better reflect how the waves would actually change if they were passing through different kinds of media. You run the simulation again, and then you compare the results with the real data, and then you iterate and you keep improving your model to get better and better results. Yeah.
That's in this sense. And if you have a forecast of the future disasters, is there any lawsuit case or some very bad forecasting causing many panics, or other way around, that you cannot expect some real disaster that made a huge damage, that the scientists in Italy were jailed by that wrong forecasting?
Oh yeah. No, that is a serious problem, and honestly, that's more of a policy issue than a science issue, because you're never going to have a 100% accurate forecast, and so it's more of an issue of saying this is the best that we're able to do right now, please take it into account, but we're not going to like guarantee that it's completely correct because we can't. So, yeah.
Yeah, that may be a reason why the politicians do not believe scientists.
Well, no, this is something that we should talk about more, but I think what you should point out is that, scientists may not be 100% correct, but they're more than 0% correct. So take advantage of the non-zero correctness. Oh, yes?
How efficient are these computations to run?
I'm sorry?
How efficient are these computations to run? How long does it take?
Efficient. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it totally depends on the computation. This particular one right here, this was kind of moderate size. This is probably on the order of like using 100 processors for a few days. But we have other simulations right now that we're running that take they would use 100,000 processors for a month. So, we can, depending on what we're looking at, we can really just hit the limits of any kind of computing resource available. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Actually, I have a question to John. Why you?
Public access.
Yeah, public access. But I assume there are maybe some commercial companies who are assessing the risk and provide maybe a service to the customers for charging some fee, and maybe Munich Re and those insurance companies their own data not to share, but they keep it. But in your case, you intended to open it, so I wanted to ask why you are doing this.
What's interesting is that some insurance company, some client-side insurance company contacted us recently and said, the big insurance companies are using fear to sell earthquake insurance. We have no idea what our risk is. They tell us we should buy earthquake insurance regardless of what they think, and so therefore what do? What do we tell our clients? So they would like an independent estimate, of what these risk they might face. For example, some of these commercial buildings they talk about, they're 20-story or 50-story buildings. Their earthquake insurance bill might be $3 million a year. So an assessment, that might cost us, $1,000 to produce could save these people many millions of dollars.
The feedback from those, to your users.
So this whole activity is just getting underway, but the people we're working with in Washington say that their client base is really very interested in some kind of estimate like this.
And the linkage with your, products, your products, about the relation with like NOAA or USGS, how the government agencies are sort of getting or interacting with your services. Are they integrating it or?
Well, so NASA's actually running our website, our forecast on one of their websites that Andrew Godwin, in fact, built, and it's it's getting more and more play, basically. It's our goal to make this free and open as much as possible, but there are some costs involved.
Thank you very much. So we have one change in the order of the presentation. We first go to this fifth talk, the talks and problems for reconstruction works from the disaster by Professor Onoda. You go first, and then the Professor Hori will be the next.